And particularly, Lord, we pray for your peace in the midst of all discussion. We pray that your prevailing presence would abide in this place, O God. Guide hearts and minds, Lord. Direct us, Lord God. Let there be wisdom, godly wisdom among us. And Lord, everything said and done will be for the betterment of our country, God. We speak blessings over our Bahama land. Where there's negativity, we pull them down in the name of Jesus. We cancel every negative word spoken over our nation. And we declare, oh God, that our nation will be a blessed nation, a successful nation, and a godly nation. We ask these things in the name of your Son, Jesus the Christ. And everyone says, Amen. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. On earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. God bless you. Have a peaceful session.
Good morning again. Adoption of minutes.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the adoption of the minutes of the last meeting of this Senate, which was held on the 15th day of June 2018, if I may obtain a second.
It has been moved and seconded that the minutes be adopted as presented. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The minutes have been adopted. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign, swearing in of new senators, communications by the President, messages from the Governor General,
None.
messages from the House of Assembly.
Message from the House of Assembly.
Bahamas number 12. Message to the Honorable the President and Honorable Members of the Senate from the Speaker and representatives of the Honorable House of Assembly. The House of Assembly acquaints the Honorable the Senate that they have passed the following bills and desire the consent of that Honorable Chamber, namely, a bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st July 2018 and ending 30th June 2019. A bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $290,319,008 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending 30th June 2019. A bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act. A bill for an act to provide for the imposition and collection of excise taxes and for connected purposes. A bill for an act to amend the Value-Added Tax Act. A bill for an act to amend the Customs Management Act. A bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act. A bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act. A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act. A bill for an act to amend the Industrial Relations Act. A bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of customs duties and to give effect to the harmonized system of tariff and for connected purposes. A bill for an act to amend the Police Force Act. A bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act. A bill for an act to amend the Port Authorities Act. A bill for an act to amend the Harbor Dues Act. House of Assembly, Nassau, 18th June 2018. Halson Nutri, Speaker.
I would like to take this opportunity to withdraw all those bills tabled with consent of the House. I move a resolution to do that last week on the 15th. We withdraw all the bills tabled, and we will substitute them with these bills here. Thank you. Yes?
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that the budget bills presented in this Senate be withdrawn and replaced with those read previously.
Thank you. For the avoidance of doubt, a number of these bills have been amended in the other place, and they have been substituted now. And so, yeah, we want to, we will ask for first reading of all. Thank you. Madam President, I beg leave to move for the, oh, you need to go to essay. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Okay, yes, miss.
Laying of documents by ministers, communications by ministers, communication by senators, questions, answers to questions, presentations of petitions, appointment of select committees, reports of committees. It would appear as if you would like a 5-minute. Are you okay? Okay. Yeah, it really isn't. Reports of committees. First reading of bills.
Madam President, it is the request for unanimous consent that we do first reading and also second reading in committee, that we commence that debate now, today. We have the unanimous consent? I see some heads nodding, but I know I had to wait to hear from you. Okay, thank you. Madam President, I beg leave to move for first reading of the bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on the revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st July 2018, ending 30th June 2019. If I may obtain a second.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st July 2018 and ending 30th June 2019 be read a first time. As many are as in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on the revenue account for financial year commencing 1st of July 2018 and ending 30th June 2019.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $319,008 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending 30th June 2019. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $299,319,008 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending 30th of June 2019. All those, as many are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Ordered that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act for the appropriation of the sum of $299,319,008 for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for capital development for the financial year ending 30th June.
That's mine.
2019.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of the Stamp Amendment Bill 2018. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise again to second that.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act be read a first time. As many are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Stamp Act.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Customs Management Act. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Customs Management Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Customs Management Act.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Business License Act. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Business License Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Business License Act.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Road Traffic Act.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Police Force Act. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Police Force Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Police Force Act.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Harbor Dues Act. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Harbor Dues Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Harbor Dues Act.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Industrial Relations Act. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Industrial Relations Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Industrial Relations Act.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Port Authorities Act. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Port Authorities Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Port Authorities Act.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act.
Further first readings?
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second. Second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Financial Administration and Audit Act.
Further first readings.
Yes. Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of the value-added amendment, a bill for an act to amend the Value-Added Tax Act. If I may obtain a second. That's a long title.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to amend the Value-Added Tax Act be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye. Senators, I need a response and
Aye.
attention at this time. I will repeat. All those in favor of the bill being read a first time would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed would say nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Value-Added Tax Act.
Further first readings.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to provide for the imposition and collection of excise taxes and for connected purposes, if I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to provide for the imposition and collection of excise taxes and for connected purposes be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the imposition and collection of excise taxes and for connected purposes.
Further first readings.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the first reading of a bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of customs duties and to give effect to the harmonized system of tariff and for connected purposes.
Is there a second?
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that a bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of customs duties and to give effect to the harmonized system of tariff and for connected purposes be read a first time. All those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a first time.
A bill for an act to make new provisions for the imposition and collection of customs duties and to give effect to the harmonized system of tariff and for connected purposes.
Further first readings.
Then on.
Second reading and committal of bills.
Madam President, I beg leave to move for the second reading and committal of a bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of monies for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of Commonwealth of the Bahamas on the revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st July 2018 and ending 30th of June 2019. Thank you. Yep. Madam President, good morning to you and to my fellow senators. It's impossible to stand here and not to address the issue du jour, the issue of the day, namely the firing of several parliamentary secretaries. Let me say that we have a peculiar political system here. It's called the Westminster parliamentary system. It has only been the political system of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for the past 300 years. My friend is at My friend is at full attention, and fully engaged.
You're in a very good mood this morning. You're in a very good mood.
My friend opposite has been in the egging on frame of mind for the last several days, and I'm sure that that will not stop. Egging on. But
Kept the PLB together.
the Westminster system has only been our political system for about 300 years. And even before that time, when the pirates bore sway, certainly on the island of New Providence, they had their own pirate parliaments, which, by and large, excepting for a few gunfights on the floor thereof, followed the Westminster system. So, this is a system. This is a system that has its own peculiar rules. We know not only are they peculiar, they are well established. They are almost inflexible. These rules are clear and are well known to all who enter the political arena. Shortly after the Free National Movement was elected to office, we had a parliamentary caucus meeting to which all members of Parliament were invited to attend, and in which all the basic rules of Parliament were touched upon and explained. I was one of the presenters at that conference and spoke to these issues directly. I did so because, being something of a student of Bahamian political history, I was aware of the fact that governments elected with large majorities invariably experience great problems with the backbench. Nature abhors, as a writer said, and I can't remember his name, but nature abhors a vacuum. And even in human relations, nature abhors vacuums in this way. There's a principle of human behavior called differentiation, where if you see you have two children and one is mommy and daddy's favorite, the other tends to be on the rebellious side, because this is the way in which that child, who is not bestowed with the immediacy or overtly the favorite child, finds a way to differentiate his or her conduct in a way to get attention. So we see Cain didn't like Abel. It goes right back to the dawn of history. When parental affection goes one way, or parent-parental affection, then there is a reaction to it. So I was aware at the time, going and thinking about this conference, that there really are there are great perils in having a massive and overwhelming majority, because the difficulty is for everybody to understand that all are equally loved, all are equally needed, all are equally appreciated, while some end up in cabinet and some don't. And this has been a perennial problem that has plagued our political system. No, it's not only that. Of course, there are elements of principle that are involved. I'm not denigrating recent events. There are elements of principle that will manifest themselves. But the root of the problem lies in, or I am not where I think I should be, whatever that is. Okay? That may well be a part of the root. I'm not saying that it is, but I was aware that historically that was a problem that beset many governments. In fact, the birth of the Free National Movement arose almost inexorably because of the massiveness of the PLP's win in the 1968 general elections, called after the death of Preston Albury, where you had a massive PLP majority. Uriah McPhee, sorry. Okay, Uriah McPhee, I apologize. Right. Anyway, so once that situation arose, you saw difficulties between the backbench and cabinet members, and that's why it's not purely a question of whether I'm in cabinet. It's a question, it could well be that whether, as a member of cabinet, I feel that my views are being respected. It could be many things. But we know that 4 members of the PLP cabinet and 4 backbenchers broke from the PLP. And there were reasons and there were differences. And so knowing that political history, that even in our own foundation we arose in a circumstance like that, and we know that after 1973, between 1973 and 1976, the 77 election, the PLP continued to have difficulties with parliamentary secretaries, with some ministers, with backbenchers particularly. And there was a very raucous backbench caucus. We know that Carlton Francis resigned on point of principle to do with the issues of gaming at that time. We know that he then was part of a caucus. We know that Ed Moxey, as a parliamentary secretary, demonstrated against the budget because it didn't provide funding for Jumbe Village, and he was fired. He didn't even vote, because remember, the Manual of Cabinet Procedures specifically states that you shall not publicly differ from the government's position if you are a parliamentary secretary and also, of course, a minister. Meaning, it's not simply a question of not even voting. You don't have the right of free speech that every MP generally has as a parliamentary secretary. Every MP has the right of free speech. And this is the message I gave my colleagues at that meeting. Your voice is your own as a member of parliament. You were elected by your constituents to represent them on the floor of the House of Assembly and say whatever the Lord lay on your breast to say. But your vote is mortgaged to the governing party, the party on whose ticket you were elected. If the whip is on, you must vote according to the whip. If the government determines that there is a question that is properly a question of conscience and says the whip is not on, everybody may vote the way they wish, you vote according to your conscience. Those are the principles and those are the rules, and I explain them to my colleagues. Every MP has the inalienable right to free speech. I remember as a backbencher, as a side note, on several occasions I stood up and criticized budgets. You know, there was a very hard time for us at that time. And I remember the mantra was more with less, and I stood up and I scoffed. What are you talking about more with less? All you get is less with less. But in fact, the then Prime Minister Hubert Ingham had to get up and specifically answer me. But I was a backbencher exercising my right to speak for my constituents. But those times, as the present times, were extremely bad economically. And we had to take, at that time, drastic measures. We had at that time to impose the same spending restrictions that presently are being imposed. Budgets of ministries were slashed by 5% off the top. And the mantra was more with less. And as a backbench MP, I stood up and exercised my right to say, I don't believe you. All you can get is less with less. My people deserve more. I'm speaking for my people. But I voted for the budget. So an MP has the right, inalienable, to speak freely. But on a matter of confidence, he must vote with the governing party, according to the whip. Whenever the whip is on, he is bound to toe the line and vote with the government. These are not Bahamian rules. These are the rules that are intrinsic to the parliamentary system of government. This is what makes the parliamentary system of government, quite frankly, far more efficient as a system of governance than the biggest competitor around, which is the congressional system, and I'll come to that. Now, let us go a step further. Each parliamentary secretary is bound to observe all the discipline of a cabinet minister, since a parliamentary secretary is, in fact, a junior minister. He or she is someone who has essentially been earmarked for intense training. and early advancement to cabinet office. That's what the creation of that post by the founders of our Constitution had in mind. That you would have a grade of member of parliament, not quite ready for cabinet office, or who couldn't be accommodated because of the practical realities of the day. So you may have a whole host of new young MPs, but then you have 8 or 10 weighty persons who've been in the trenches, who have the experience, etc. So you can't accommodate everybody that a new revolutionary government brought on by the support of the youth would wish to have in the front line all at once. So you earmark and you choose those younger members, less experienced, who you want to give that intense training to. And they're the ones who became parliamentary secretaries. I remember in 1992, I think it was Tommy who became a parliamentary secretary. The rest of us were on the back bench. But we his contemporaries. But we served our time. We formed our backbench caucus. That's what we did. Yeah.
We had a very
Yeah. We had a very active caucus. Yeah, we had a very active caucus,
We all
except
picked off individuals.
I always tell this story that night when we formed the caucus, we said, Dion, you're the natural leader. Will you be the leader of the caucus? Dion said, nope. They said, Carl, how about you? I said, well, Dion ain't gonna do it. I definitely ain't gonna do it. So we all settled on Calvin Johnson. Because Chuck said, they asked Chuck said, not me. Chuck Virgil. So we settled on Calvin Johnson. Calvin said, yes, sir. 1 week later, parliamentary secretary, Ministry of Health. 1 week later, right away. We didn't announce anything to the public, you know. I always wondered how Mr. Ingram knew exactly who we had elected.
Don't talk too much about this.
I don't know how, but it didn't take a week before Calvin was a parliamentary secretary, and of course out of the caucus. So, because of this special constitutional status, and from the very inception of it, parliamentary secretaries were imposed and had to bear the same duties as a cabinet minister. And the Manual of Cabinet Ministry Procedure clearly sets out the rules which bind all parliamentary secretaries and cabinet ministers. And not only is a parliamentary secretary precluded from voting against a government measure, he is even precluded from speaking out publicly against any government measure. He is a member of the government. And, you know, like I said, in our history, Edmund Moxey, then a parliamentary secretary, demonstrated against a budget that did not include funding for Jumbe Village. He didn't even vote against it. The offense was to demonstrate, to make a public criticism of the budget. And he was fired. Rules are no respecter of persons. And so just because a person may cut a sympathetic figure, even a beloved figure, there can be no exemption from the rules, because rules are rules. If you do not have a system of rules, you have chaos. Perhaps some people believe, Madam President, some people believe that we should change our system. I've heard this recently. And I said, to what? How do we change our system? Should we go to a congressional system? Well, what would be the consequence of that? First of all, the congressional system is a very expensive system to operate. Secondly, in a congressional system, it's very inefficient. If the House decide they don't like the Senate, or none like the President, nobody does anything. We saw this for 8 years with President Obama, where the system was able to be used to totally frustrate the will of the people by persons in this congressional system. Is that what Bahamians would wish? Well, the only other alternative is some form of a dictatorial system, and none of us would like that. None of us want to follow a communist system with one single party and a political executive, and then when the chief is there. You know, so those are the three alternatives. You have too much democracy in a congressional system where entrenched vested interests can frustrate the will of the people by parliamentary inertia. And then you have a dictatorship of the people or whatever it is that makes up a communist system where it's one party rule. Nobody wants that in their right minds. And so we're left with this hybrid system called the Westminster system, which, you know, I think I have to accept Sir Winston Churchill's definition of Westminster democracy. It's a lousy system, but it's the best yet devised. Better than any of the rest. No, he didn't, but I'm paraphrasing it. I'm paraphrasing it. Yes, yes. No, I mean, I didn't Google the quote, but the essential quote of Sir Winston Churchill was that democracy is a lousy system, but it's the best system yet devised by the mind of man. And so, Madam President, we are where we are. Now, that being said, it is to be hoped that things will settle down and that in time there can be a restoration of that peace and harmony at all levels that our party has historically shown. And our party, the Free National Movement, has historically shown that reconciliation is always possible. His Excellency, Sidney Collie, who stepped down as minister on the public recommendation of the Prime Minister because of a technical mistake made by his technical officers that affected the holding of local government elections. Nothing personal to the minister, no breach of no code of ethics, a technical mistake. It was made to step down, publicly told on the floor of Parliament. Okay? The point being that he is now our ambassador to the United States of America.
Excellent job.
We have, and he is doing an excellent job. In fact, he's recently got elected to all kind of high posts in the Organization of American States, and we commend him. There's also the history of others, one of whom was fired summarily, who later on came on to become deputy leader of the party, deputy prime minister, and still serves in high cabinet office. So the Free National Movement has a distinct track record of sternness, of adherence to the rules, but also of reconciliation and moving forward progressively together. And it is to be hoped, as I have said, that the Free National Movement will continue in its tradition of reconciliation and forward progress. And I am happy to note and to have heard, at least from Member of Parliament McAlpine, a commitment to the party. That, okay, we have our differences, but he expressed a commitment to the party. Because at the end of the day, why do we run or seek to hold office in a government unless we have a basic level of commitment to the vehicle, the party, which made it all possible? So, Madam President, that name was coined by others before, the Free FNM. I believe former cabinet Tennyson Wells at one point was threatening to form a Free FNM. So we've been there before. Madam President, these are indeed trying times, and today we come to this chamber to debate a budget, which is, and I assert this, a sincere attempt for the government to rise to meet the challenges which confront our young nation. This budget is an enormous exercise in fiscal and financial restraint, on the one hand. On the other hand, it is a call to national self-sacrifice and burden bearing. We are all called upon to make sacrifices and to carry heavy burdens. Yes, there are aspects of this budget that are a bitter, bitter pill. But it is a bitter pill that we are all being called upon to shoulder, carry, to inwardly digest, because there are some serious structural problems that have now reached the point where they must be tackled because they are unsustainable, and they are unsustainably damaging the very future of this country. And so now is the time for burden bearing and sacrifice for all of us. Indeed, the recurrent budget of the Office of the Attorney General, Ministry of Legal Affairs, has been eviscerated, cut to an irreducible minimum. Truly, we are being called upon today to do more with less. And we know the reality is that one can usually only do less with less. That is the reality of where the nation stands today. In our budget, there's been a reduction of more than 350,000, that's right, of more than 350,000 in the allocation for permanent and pensionable salaries, meaning that our ability to engage staff has been removed entirely. All we have now is what our previous year's salary bill was. And the allocation for the employment of contractual workers has been cut by another $300,000. So another, yeah, I know, but it's only the figures that give me problems. Better get the figures right. Another three. So the priest said, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. Yes. Another $300,000 has been cut from the allocation for the engagement of contract workers on a monthly basis. So there has been a more than $600,000 cut in the total allocation for personal emoluments and salaries. In essence, we have been reduced to a position of holding on to what we have, and that's it. There has, however, been a slight increase in an item called other contractual services, and the sub-item in that would be in development contracts. There has been a new allocation of just over $1 million to assist in defraying the costs of bringing the Freedom of Information Act into full force and effect. These funds will initially be earmarked for widespread training exercises, as we also look towards the appointment of a National Information Commissioner and the outfitting and staffing of his or her office. And that commissioner also, when he or she shall be appointed, will, of course, we are making arrangements for the commissioner to go and spend some time in Jamaica to actually see the day-to-day operations and to learn and get the, to get a full understanding of the duties of such a commissioner and how to work out the balancing act once again against the right to know and the right not to know. The sum of $100,000 has also been allocated, a new sum, for the item called cellular liberalization. Now, as we are all aware, the past administration continued the F&M policy of cellular liberalization when they recall that the Free National Movement government privatized BTC, and then there have been moves to liberalize consequent on that. One of the things that the last administration did, of course, was to change the deal on privatization, but that was more smoke than reality. That was more show than fact. And they also, though, liberalized the cellular sector when they licensed Alive, a subsidiary of Cable Bahamas, to be the second cellular service provider in the country. Now, at that time, the Bahamas government invested more than $70 million to, in essence, obtain sweat equity in one half of the shares in Alive. So one half of the shares in Alive are presently held on behalf of the government in a company rather inelegantly named Holding Co. But that's the name of the company. And the Holding Co. holds those shares. At some point, the government wishes to sell those shares so that they can recoup, if not all, then a part, Madam President, of the $70 million invested in the Alive company. When we came in, we met a proposal that was ongoing and being actioned, if you will, being followed through on, of the former government, that the shares, the government shares, or the majority of the government shares in Holding Co., where they held the Alive shares, would be sold to the Alive shares, the majority of the shares in Alive held by Holding Co. would be sold to the Bahamian market, not the Bahamian people. The proposal of the former government was that those shares would be offered to institutional investors, credit unions, pension funds, insurance companies, for example, that were in the mortgage market, that were giving financial services, etc., asset managers and investment advisors, etc. So that, in a sense, the pooled resources of Bahamian workers, as found in credit unions or in pension funds, would be used to purchase these shares in Alive. Thereby, I think the argument was spreading the benefits of ownership, but not the ownership, over a wide cross-section of Bahamian workers and pension fund beneficiaries. That was the PLP's approach. However, the Free National Movement has always had a different approach. It's the approach that we followed with the bridge bonds for the building of what is now the Sydney Poitiers Bridge, and the bonds for the Arak Port development. The shares there were all supposed to go to Bahamians and did go to Bahamians individually. When we sold our shareholdings in Cable Bahamas, again, or part of it, it went to Bahamian people individually. The Free National Movement has always had the view that Bahamians, individual Bahamians, should have the right to purchase IPO shares, initial public offering shares, in privatized or formerly government-owned entities personally, so that they would have personal stakes in these formerly government-owned ventures or these new ventures, so that individuals, straw vendors, teachers, public servants, military officers, police, ordinary Bahamians working in banks, in law offices, in retail or wholesale establishments, that they would have the opportunity to get a piece of the rock, if you will. And so our position is that we will pursue the FNM's view of ownership in the Bahamian society, which is the ownership of individual Bahamians of their own shares in all of these assets. So the $100,000 is really the carrying cost, and it's for a simple reason, that Alive has really only been in action, if you will, setting out and incurring a lot of costs, setting out its infrastructure throughout the Bahamas, complying with the mandates for universal coverage, service to the far southern islands, universal service. They're still engaged in a lot of discussion with the dominant provider, BBC, about the terms and access to part of their infrastructure. So, in essence, the true profit position of Alive has not yet been determined and they have not got enough years of accounts to justify under the existing laws governing the issuance of securities to the general public. They haven't got enough of a track record to go to the general public with their shares, or for the government to go to the general public with their shares. And it would not be appropriate, in our view, for the government to waive any of these rules in order to facilitate us going to the Bahamian people to offer the shares in Alive. And so really this year is a carrying over year, and we'll be able in a better position by the end of this year to review the accounts, to see the picture, to determine whether there is sufficient under law for Alive to their shares to be put out in an initial public offering. But right now, it is clear by all advice that we've received that the Alive is not ready for that as yet, and so we will not be moving at this time to fulfill our fundamental commitment to offer shares to individual Bahamians. But hopefully, in very short order, once there's a sufficient track record for Alive and its profits and losses are seen over a period of time, we will, and certainly before the next elections, go to the Bahamian people with those shares. Madam President, it should also be noted that the amount of money allocated to the Eugene DePuch Law School has been reduced by $500,000 this year, from $2.5 million last year to $2 million this year. And also, the astute reader of budget documents would note that the Ministry of Finance is projecting further reductions in the allocation to the law school. Now, in fullness, I should say that my ministry has also had reason to express concerns about some matters related to the operations of the Eugene DePuch Law School. These are matters related to its structure and its functions. And right now, we've just recently gone into a quite expensive rental arrangement, but we had to do it. We met it on the table from the former administration, and when we looked into the facts, we could only agree with them that, as questionable as it might be, and I don't mean it in a bad way, the move had to be made, because the conditions in which the Eugene DePuch Law School's administration were housed in prior to their move were not acceptable. They were in the old McAlpine building, not a reference to our good friend up north, but that's the name of the building that came to be known as the Parliamentary building, or the Parliamentary Commissioners building. And there are some structural issues there that made it undesirable and very difficult for the administration of the Eugene DePuch Law School. Plus, because of size limitations, different functions were spread out over 3 or 4 other buildings all around, and we could not adequately provide for the students. So we met this in train, and we approved its continuance, and so they've now in the process of finalizing their move to the City Corporate Center, which will be on Rosetta Street, right just out Murphyville area. But we've been asking ourselves as a ministry, and have engaged in some discussions with the principal, and in fact the issue has been canvassed with the Council of Legal Education in Trinidad. Would it not be more efficient and more effective for the Eugene DePuch Law School to be integrated as a postgraduate school of law, Eugene DePuch School of Law, in the University of the Bahamas? No. We met that in train, and that's the position. Right now, University of the Bahamas is using every piece of space that it has. I'm glad that one of the things I did when formerly as Minister of Education at the inception, to say that the Harry Moore Library should be built so that it's capable to be added on to, it's built with a block design. Although it's semicircular, it's built with the ability to simply cut the foundation, build up, and join whole new sections onto it. And that's the architectural concept was amended to achieve that goal, because there is more space that is going to be needed somewhere. Oh, Bahamian. mind where I go to college. I'm a Bahamian first. I want the best for the country. So we have been in some discussions on this issue. Now, if that is achieved, then we see that we could have significant savings in terms of the amount we have to allocate to the Eugene DePuche Law School every year. I would make a further point that there's a peculiar structure that is in place that has governed all the law schools throughout the region. That's Norman Manley, Hugh Wooding, and the Eugene DePuche Law School for decades now, which is that it's the staff that set the salary, not the owners. So the ministers don't set the salary. They're given something that they have to approve that's already done by the staff at the council, which is a peculiarity, because when you look and you see some salary, you say, well, hold a second. And so all of these things were causes of concern and discussion. And it just seemed better, and we've suggested it, but we've not gone no further. It may well be, though. And it was paradoxical that the Ministry of Finance suggested the same thing to us. But we had had no prior discussions with them. That it may well be more efficient, more cost-effective, better for education as a whole in the Bahamas to look towards the integration. You see, because every university, remember, every university, to be worthy of its full stature, must also offer postgraduate courses, must offer postgraduate degrees. That is the very definition of a university. It's a college that doesn't do that. But universities have different schools. We see that the School of Business was recently completed, etc. And so there's always the possibility of offering postgraduate degrees. And so we would hope that perhaps we could have a better discussion, but we'll also have a full discussion with the Council of Legal Education and with our colleagues throughout the rest of the region, because I'm given to understand that there are similar cries coming from other jurisdictions, and we look at it. But the point is that we don't want to diminish the quality of legal education. We want to enhance the quality of legal education in the Bahamas. On that note, I'm pleased to confirm that the Council of Legal Education has recently agreed, and we only have to formalize an MOU, but it has been agreed that Bahamian students who graduate from the University of the Bahamas with the University of the Bahamas law degree will now and henceforth be accorded automatic rights to entry into Eugene DePuche Law School. And that was done this year. So, never again will Bahamian students who graduate from the University of the Bahamas be told, well now, if you want to go and perfect your legal education in your own country, you have to sit a qualifying exam. Okay? The only qualifier is that University of the Bahamas degree, and they are entitled to automatic entry. Madam President, the Constitutional Amendment Act of 2017, creating the Constitutional Office of the Independent Director of Public Prosecutions, has only very recently, Madam President, been brought into force. Due to the proximity of this budgetary period, we were not able to change the arrangements related to the financing indications or the financing of the Office of the Independent DPP. Next year, the Director of Public Prosecutions will have a separate head. Rather, if you look at Head 7, the Office of the Attorney General, Ministry of Legal Affairs, you'll see that there's a block grant for the Eugene DePuche Law School, which covers all of their expenses, salaries, staff, all their operating expenses, etc. Well, similarly, you will have an item there for the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, which will set out the emoluments and of his professional staff and the support staff necessary to run his office, etc. And so it will be clearly separated from the monies that are allocated to the ministry directly. In the separate head, he'll have his own financial officer who will program, such funds as are allocated throughout the year according to needs, and you'll have that degree of financial independence from the suzerainty of the Permanent Secretary and the Ministry of Legal Affairs. Now, suffice it to say that even as we continue under the old budgetary scenario for this year, let me be very specific and state categorically that all arrangements that are necessary to ensure the full functional autonomy or independence of the prosecutor's office are already being made. Autonomy of the office, independence of the performance of its function in terms of determining whether to commence or discontinue, or how to commence, or how to perform any prosecution. That's his independent authority. Autonomy of his office, because it is an office that has to be under some ministry, has to be responsible for it. Similarly, Madam President, moving on, the government has recently appointed Dame Anita Allen to serve as a new Law Reform Commissioner for the Bahamas, and I can assure you that Dame Anita is already hard at work in the performance of her duties. Just yesterday, she completed a thorough review of certain proposed amendments to our immigration laws and sent me this long email, but I haven't had a chance to look at it because I've been trying to prepare as much as I can for this debate. But I will address it as soon as I'm off my hind legs, and I'll look at my phone and try and address it and get back to you, Dame Anita. But just yesterday I got a thorough review of certain proposed amendments to our immigration laws, and I am confident that over the coming years, Bahamians everywhere will benefit from her wealth of judicial knowledge and experience as she moves to address critical areas such as the reform of our electoral laws, land reform, reform of our Companies Act, which is desperately in need of it, reform of our entire Immigration Act, inclusive of those areas where we seek to provide a legal remedy for those who illegally land in the Bahamas but don't actually set foot in the Bahamas, who are apprehended at sea. No, we are not doing that at all. We are not doing that at all. In fact, recent events would tend to show that sadly it seems that the parents or guardians of persons responsible for young adults, not children, young adults, who were recently apprehended, all say they're not my children. Yeah, okay? Which is a cool paradoxical comparison to what is now going on in our nearest neighbor, where of course the reverse is happening. It's just one of the things. What we have done, and I can assure everybody, is to ensure that if there's the slightest evidence, I don't speak on foreign policy matters. We have a minister of foreign policy whose duty it is to speak there. But of course, as a Bahamian, there are certain fundamental rights and freedoms that we have in our country that we expect to be extended to anyone under and within the territorial boundaries of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And that has been upheld, mandated, and imposed on successive governments since independence by the judiciary. And so you can say that I uphold all the rights, freedoms, and liberties guaranteed to everyone within the territorial boundaries of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And on international matters, we have a Minister of Foreign Affairs who can speak very competently to all those issues. Just want you to know. I personally have a view, but I don't choose to express it. What is your view? When you say yours, I'll say mine, okay? How's that? Okay. So, we are looking to reform, and we may well have, particularly in the area of the Independent Boundaries Commission, is an area that we are focusing on other issues such as having a fixed election date, we're also focusing on. I want to assure Bahamians, I've heard this complaint about a fixed election date, but I want to tell you that even in Britain, where they have a law for fixed election dates, the Prime Minister and Parliament, which is sovereign, and Parliament in the Bahamas, which is sovereign under the Constitution, still has the right to call a snap election. We saw that with Theresa May. And she called one. She thought she was riding on a high too, like the member opposite. But you know, the member opposite, he thinks he's on a high. Well, like, you see what happened to a whole government that thought they were on a high. Okay, Theresa May had 40 vote majority in Parliament and ended up minus 10. She had to go to some very right-wing Irishmen to get their 10 votes in order to get over the hurdle and be able to govern. Coalition government. So remember one thing about politics and popularity, it's transitory, Mr. Leader, opposite. Okay, and be careful what you ask for. Yes, indeed, indeed. Let me, before I go on to speak about some other budget issues, because there are some issues, and I know that members opposite will, you think that the member opposite, the leader opposite, is on a high. Just wait till he get up to talk about VAT. He will be lauding it all over us. Okay, fine. Absolutely, because you caused the problem when you were in last. You caused the problem when you were in last. Before I go on to speak about these issues, and the matters other than those that are directly related to the Office of the Attorney General, let me pause to commend the hard-working draftsmen in the Law Reform Commission, and particularly the Director of Law Reform, Ms. Tina Demerit Roy, and her staff. I could name them all. You know, Lamisha, Latoya, Talika, those are the three principal supports of the Director of Law Reform. And I have to thank them for the yeoman work they do. You know, sometime around the middle of May, they drop all the work they're doing for the Office of the Attorney General. They go into a huddle with finance, and they don't come up for air until the budget communication is leveled and a host of bills tabled every year in Parliament. And then they're thoroughly exhausted. You can't even get them to pick up the phone. They'd be so tired because of the back and forward, the constant meetings, the drafting, the having the drafts criticized, and the technical consultations. They put in enormous yeoman's work. And I want to thank them for what they do every year, and throughout the budget period. Since the budget was passed 2 days ago, 3 or 4 of the bills here, they've consolidated all the amendments, so thankfully, we won't have to read those 4-page amendments to the tariff bill, reciting items 0.1124.0.35456, and reading all of the little entries. None of that has to be done because of the work that they've done. So I thank them. They are vitally necessary. Let me say this about governance. Our draftspersons perform each year in drafting the many budget bills, and these bills are necessary to give life to the estimates and the tax or tax-exempt initiatives of successive governments. Ministers can make all the declarations they want in the budget communication. If the hard work of getting the numbers right, getting the law right isn't done, it's all for naught. And it is those ladies who do it, and I want to thank them. I can tell you that without their sterling efforts, all would simply be sound and fury. So we owe a debt of gratitude to these hard-working attorneys and draftspersons for the excellent work they always do. Now, Madam President, my entire budget presentation really could be based on one page in this 227-page budget. And that's page 41 of the budget. 200, no, flip to 26, you see 27. I looked. Page 41. See here? You're right, it's 226. I did bad counting. Yes, okay. 226. Let me make that correction. Yes. Okay, there you go. On page 41 is what they call the statutory expenditure. These are mandated by Article 192 of the Constitution. That's, you know, the amounts allocated to pay for the salary of the Governor General, President of the Court of Appeal, Justice of the Court of Appeal, Chief Justice, Justice of the Supreme Court, etc., and the Auditor General, etc. But it also is the sums mandated for the government to pay its bills. And my whole presentation is tied around this same page, the bottom half of it. On this page, we see that there are two items, head 26 and head 27, referred to. Public debt servicing interest, and the amount this year is 381 million and change. So 381 million and about 150,000 after that. And head 27, public debt servicing redemption. This year, that is $709 million. $709 million. Now, let me explain what this breakdown means. Public debt servicing interest is simple. Ever since the Progressive Liberal Party government under Sir Lyndon Pinling in 1968 amended the Monetary Authority Act to permit the government to borrow up to $20 million per annum to finance capital spending, thereby in 1968 December 1968, introducing deficit financing of the national budget. Ever since then, the public debt has grown and grown and grown. Every year, more and more was added to the public debt for 60 years. From 1968 to 2018, every year, the public debt has grown. Every year, for that year, the interest on all of that accumulated debt has to be paid. When I was first an MP, way back in the early 1990s, we were paying about $100 million a year, every year, in interest payments. By the time as the 2007 came, before the crash, it had risen to about $200 million a year in interest payments. After the crash, and up to today, it is now $381 million a year, simply paying interest. And what is interest? Interest is the cost of money you've already borrowed and spent. But you're only paying now, you're not paying down the national debt. You're only paying what it costs you to have borrowed that money in the past and spent it. People say, well, you were talking about 60 years ago, all that debt paid off. No, it isn't actually. Because the trend has never been to absolutely pay off a single cent. Every year, in every budget, as reflected by this specific budget item, is head 27, public debt servicing redemption. And that caused us to believe, oh yes, the government is redeeming its debt, it's paying it down. That is not so. What successive governments have done every year is borrow the money to redeem and actually to pay down interest as well. They book interest in the recurrent expenditure, and it looks as if interest is being paid out of monies you get in. But that's not the fact, because the amount of borrowing has always been sufficient to pay both principal and interest and capital spending. Now, this is where you run into a real hurdle. This is where you run into a real hurdle. Because you never pay for capital spending from the time the Monetary Authority Act was amended 60 years ago till today. Capital spending has never, ever in any budget been paid for out of recurrent revenue. So every new dock built, every new school built, every road paved, every road repaved, every dock repaired, every classroom repaired, everything done through the Ministry of Public Works for 60 years has been done purely on borrowed money. Precisely. Or you won't do as much. You won't do as much. And certainly, if you don't borrow, you can't even pay your debts now. That's the problem here. If you don't borrow, you can't even pay your interest now. Okay? And so, you have to borrow. And what happens when you borrow to pay interest? I'll tell you what happens. When you borrow to pay interest, that, what is only an interest payment, attributed on paper to your recurrent spending, becomes principal and is added to your national debt. So when we borrow to pay this $381 million, as we will in effect do, don't fool yourself. It happened last year and it's going to happen this year. When we borrow in effect to pay that, that $380 million will join the $292 million last year as new borrowing principal, adding to the national debt. And this is why decades of ministers of finance in this country, and particularly since the late 1990s, coming into the 2000s to now, always spoke about how what they were doing in the budget would reduce the rate of increase of the national debt. And to you, if you weren't listening carefully, you thought they were saying they were doing something about the national debt. Oh, we're gonna, and you walk away thinking that we're gonna be reducing something to do with the national debt. We don't always hear everything that we say. We hear what we want to hear. And I've sat in parliaments and on the opposite side over there and heard confident leaders of this place saying how, with the discipline announced by the Minister of State for this and that over there, and the Prime Minister as Minister of Finance over there, the rate of increase in the national debt will be slow. The GFS deficit, no one knows what that means. I doubt, anyway, I won't say that, I'm gonna, but it sounds pretty. The GFS deficit will be brought under control from 3% to 1%, 1.5%, or 1%. And all of these nostrums. But the reality is, when you borrow to pay interest, that interest becomes principal and part of your national debt for the next year. When you borrow for capital, which always happens, shamelessly, that becomes part of your national debt the next year off the top. I'm not, the alternative to borrowing for capital is to reduce your national debt to such a point that you are able to pay most of it out of recurrent revenue. What you can't pay, that would be an appropriate amount to look at. Okay? But borrowing what you could pay on your debt by another borrowing is self-defeating. So you look at margins. So let's go back. Hey, let's go back. Isn't it better for us, instead of saying we're going to spend nearly 400 million paving roads, doing all these wonderful things, let's find some creative ways so we only have to spend 100 million this year. Well, then we know that's only 100 million that's added to the national debt. But assuredly, every cent you borrow for capital spending is going to add to your national debt. And unless you find a way of paying down your national debt, your borrowing will sink the ship, because it's reaching the point where you cannot borrow enough to do. Right now, it's difficult for the government of the Bahamas to borrow enough to pay and meet $1 billion in debt servicing requirement in 1 year. Another nearly 400,000, you say, for capital spending. That's 1.4 billion, you know, just in borrowing, foreshadowed. Start there. And you think, my God. And we criticize the former government for every year since, let's say, when the VAT came in, the debt went up by $1 billion, notwithstanding VAT. So for 3 years, two years, and into the third year, when their budget we went to, the debt went up, and borrowing went up to $1 billion every year, notwithstanding VAT. $1 billion a year borrowing. That's why the national debt ballooned. That's why instead of, when we left office in 2012, we were looking at a debt servicing requirement, principal and interest, in the region of 600 million between the two. 400 million for debt servicing redemption, 200 odd million for debt servicing interest. And that is why, coming back to office, we met a vastly different picture where debt servicing redemption had doubled to more than 400 million, and debt servicing interest had gone to 290 million in 1 year. And this year, and this is to do with the way loans are structured, this year, basically, debt servicing redemption has nearly doubled in 1 year. Last year we had to pay 400 million plus, this year 700 million plus, just to roll over existing loans. This goes back to the point I made. The point I made about 60 years of debt. People say, well, we must even pay off plenty of that. No, it's actually been just rolled over. It's like dough. You roll it over all the time. You roll it over all the time. You roll it over. That's how you do duff. You got to roll that dough. Well, the other kind of dough, the other kind of dough is rolled over every year. When it's time to redeem, you don't have enough float. Let me talk sense. You don't have enough float in the kitty to pay the actual redemption amount of principal owed on this loan. And so what happens? Governments roll it over. They use this term, you know, it's such a euphemism, right? I roll over my debt. No, what they do is they renew the debt. They renew the debt when it matures. They borrow to pay it. Now, we citizens are not allowed to borrow to pay off unless we have substantial equity in something that is able, minus our equity, which we're not allowed to borrow against, but whatever, we borrow against our equity, whatever it is. But the point is, if we have something to put in and they have something to lend us, they'll lend us on our equity in order to pay off a loan. But barring that situation, your car loan, you can't borrow to pay your car loan payments. You can't borrow to pay your furniture plus furniture payments. Okay. We have a most excellent minister for Grand Bahama who will speak tomorrow. No, he'll speak tomorrow. He will speak tomorrow. In fact, all of our Grand Bahamian senators are right now busy at a major international blockchain conference opening in Grand Bahama today. And by the Prime Minister is opening it. All of our senators who are from Grand Bahama are there. All of our ministers who are from Grand Bahama are there. Several of our ministers are there. McAlpine there too. Okay? The fact of the matter is that the Tech Hub initiative for Grand Bahama is taking off as we speak. But he will, our minister from Grand Bahama, Kwesi Thompson, will undoubtedly give you more than an earful of the wonderful things that we're doing trying to fix Grand Bahama.
They say you already bought a house.
And so, Madam President,
You already moved to Grand Bahama.
the total amount that the government of the Bahamas has to borrow is $1,090,000,000 this year, as shown on page 41. Recurrent revenue minus revenue generated, the 400,000 generated, to be generated, proposed, or expected, or projected to be generated by increases in VAT. Recurrent revenue is only $2.6 billion. No, 2.1 billion. 2.2 billion. Recurrent revenue. Recurrent revenue in pages 37, page 9, and page 37. Let's look at it. Let's look at page 9. Now coming back there though. Yeah, because that's the linchpin. 1 billion. Yeah, the recurrent revenue 2018-19, that's inclusive of projected increases in VAT, is 2.6 billion. You see that? Now, if you take away the proposed 4 billion, that if you take away the 4 billion projected to be raised by the increase in VAT, that 2.6 billion is only 2.2 billion dollars. 2.2 billion. I'm on page 9. It's revenue summary. You have to go right up to the first block where it says tax revenue and look at the amount projected for VAT and other taxes, but it's just VAT really. 1,061,000,000 for this year. If you look at the previous year, it's 663 million. So approximately 400 million is projected to be raised, and that was explicitly stated in the other place. But if you take that away from the projected total revenue at the very bottom, you'd see that without the VAT increase, projected total revenue is 2.2 billion on what we have now. And this year, we have to borrow a billion, really 1.1 billion. So really, we have to borrow 50% of what we earn because if we paid our debts out of the 2.2 billion without putting aside the VAT issue, if we paid our debts as they fell due this year out of 2.2 billion, we would only have 1.1 billion left to pay every other thing we had to pay in the government. And if you look at issues such as salaries and emoluments, your ordinary recurrent spending, it is simply impossible. It's simply impossible because tied to the revenue account is also the expenditure account. And that's why the big part of this budget is taken up with expenditure. It's tied at the navel to revenue. And when you get to revenue and you look at total emoluments, $800 million, well, you have 1.1 billion. In other words, quite frankly, that isn't the electricity bill, that isn't the costs of the paper, the cars, the transportation between islands, to do all of the things necessary for ministries to effectively serve the Bahamian people. None of those things could be accommodated. And so you reach the point where it is impossible to satisfy any part of your debt burden from your recurrent revenue, and it's impossible to, let me take the implicit assertion of the leader of opposition business on the other side, impossible to fund your development without borrowing, okay? Impossible to fund national development, and not only national development though, you see, national repair. See, the problem is, we glorify this whole issue of capital spending by calling it on the development account. But most capital spending is not on development, is on preservation account. You repair to preserve what you have. It's the repair account. It's not only hurricanes though, it's the natural wear and tear, it's the nature of our subsoil being limestone, highly alkaline, the effect it has on roads, the effect it has on everything. Okay, so we understand that. Okay, but the point is, we glorify it by calling national the development account, but only a fraction is used for any actual new things towards national development. It's used for repair and maintenance of what we have. And so you can't simply say, we're going to cut all capital spending, because you will actually enter a retrograde status where you start to de-develop as a nation. So there's a certain amount of capital spending just to maintain what you have. I peg that at about $100 to $125 million a year. As far as I'm concerned, that's all the capital spending we should be doing, preserving what we have for now, until we get over this hurdle. The point being that by every single independent, unpolitical, informed analysis of the structure of the Bahamian economy, we have a structural problem. And it is a structural problem that will sink this country unless it is addressed. And the time to address it is now. For too long. And this is no criticism of previous governments or ministers of finance, most of whom were eminently qualified in their field. It is just that the chickens have come home to roost. There's no other way to put it. Yes, deficit financing as the order of the day was perfectly acceptable when these things were in a better ratio in terms of the ratio of the debt to gross domestic product to your revenue. When you're pulling in over $1 billion, I remember when we had our first $1 billion budget. Must have been about 1998. What a wonderful day that was. I remember that we were all bragging about this $1 billion budget. But when debt was in a more acceptable ratio to that $1 billion, that's fine. And when we were putting in place the building blocks of a new nation, deficit financing also was fine. But we've reached the point now where all the building blocks are in place. It's a question of management. It's a question now of turning the corner. If this country is to proceed to the next and highest level it can go, higher level that it can go, we have to address this problem. The problem, it's no longer a problem that can be addressed by the comforting nostrum of gradualism. I heard members of the opposite side in the other place speaking about a perpetuation of gradualism. Spread it out over 5 years. Worry about reducing the rate of borrowing and increase of the national debt. Don't worry about trying to take down the national debt. It is beyond that. It is beyond that. When you're at the point where you got to borrow $1 billion just to stay current, and you ain't even get into capital repair, you are in a big problem. And it is time, and the government is determined the government has determined that in order to avoid the fate of other countries in our region, have we not heard about the devaluation just last week of the Jamaican dollar? The further devaluation? Have we not heard? Yes, the one good fortune I always call my big brother to the south has, is that they have abundant blessings from nature. They have mountains. They have agricultural wealth. If they can't pay to import it, they could grow it. They have commodities, they have minerals, and they have agriculture. If they can't import it, they can grow it. They have a competitive advantage over us in one area, and that is in two: electricity costs, and the cost of food in their hotels. Because of that competitive advantage, all of those hotels source their primary sources for winter vegetables and basic products from Jamaican farmers in Mobay. Everybody happy, happy, happy. So even though with all of that though, their dollar recently was forced to be devalued. And so, we also know of what has recently happened in Barbados, where they have not reached the point of devaluation yet. No, their dollar may just be devalued for them. They have had to call in the International Monetary Fund, a fate that Jamaica had to go through several decades ago, and is still under close. And even with the so-called assistance of the International Monetary Fund, Jamaica still had to devalue their dollar last week. So the point being, Madam President, it is a policy decision that this is the Bahamas, and we don't want to see a Bahamas that has to go with a begging bowl to anybody. And we're going to do as a people what is necessary to save our country. It is a bitter pill, but we are merely having to swallow the consequences of 60 years of deficit financing. 60 years of politely rolling over debt, meaning perpetuating debt by borrowing more. And so the government took the very difficult decision. Listen, let's think of your average family. It's difficult for people to gather, to accept all these billions. It boggles the mind. I can't even think beyond $100, and you start talking about billions, it doesn't really register with people. When you try to express to your average person the enormity of the crisis, how much more time I got? 5 more minutes? Oh, it's 50 years. Okay, not 60. All right, I count bad. I was not a mathematician expert. 6, 78, 88, 98, 2008, 2010, 50 years. 50 years. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you ain't talking about it no-how, so I ain't got to worry. Yeah. No. Most people, this idea about billions and trillions and things, that doesn't register in their thinking. You think about your average husband and wife. Think about your average household. Monthly income, $2,500 or so dollars. Okay. Well, they got to pay for the mortgage. That's $700 out of that. They got to pay for the furniture loan. That's $300 out of that. Got to pay for the card loan. That's $300 out of that. Okay, so they down from having but I'm trying to deal with your average middle class family. Yeah? So you say, okay, your average middle class family, not rich people like the senator over there who talk about school loan. Mind you, some people do borrow money for school. There's no question of that. Okay. So instead of having, let's say $2,500, which you started off let's say $3,000. So $3,000 you started off with, you're down to $1,600 in disposable spending. Now from that $1,600, you got to pay your light bill, water bill. You have to do whatever it is you do to have a comfortable life. Buy groceries, pay for the gas, You know, all of that. Whatever you buy. You hear him talk about buying something. I don't know nothing about no numbers. I told you I'm very bad with numbers. Very bad with numbers, okay? All right. So it's 50 years of borrowing. Now we deal with your average household, man. Mom and pop, right? Okay. First of all, someone hit your car and got a license. And you only got road act insurance. Now, you either walk or you have to borrow some more money to fix your car. So that's the next $100 out of that $1,600, down to $1,500, right? Then, what else happens? Storm come, blow off your roof tiles. You got some people from the PLP urban will come sniff around. You don't hear from them for the next 4 months. The rain come, you get everything get wet. So to say that, you go borrow some more money to fix your roof. You do that. Because the piece of blue top they gave you and left you and condemned you to hold on your roof for 8 months ain't working. So you borrow some more money. So that $1,500 now goes down to $1,350 because you got to pay for your roof. Then put the 4x8 or whatever. Then put the top. Then put the felt and then top that on and everything you straight. But you're in debt more. So instead of having $1,600 a month to spend on what you need, you're down to $1,350. Okay, someone gets sick. Mama gets sick. Okay? You got all the medications. You might not have to pay because she's on the public ward, but you got all the medications. You got all the dislocation. You got everything that goes on. One of your other wider family member needs some money. You understand? So at some point, you're going to reach a point where what you have to pay your loans off means you can't pay for the things you ordinarily need just to have a decent life. And then you got to go try and refinance all of that. And no one's going to lend you money with nothing else. All you got is these loans now. No one's going to lend you money without some security for you to pay off all those consumer loans and occasional loans, etc., that you had to take on in order to develop your capital or preserve your capital, preserve your house, preserve your car, right? Preserve your health. All of those. So let's take your mortgage out. You're not refinancing your mortgage. You need to get money to just borrow to pay them. What security you have? You don't have any security. You're not a government. You can't say it's my sovereign debt. That is the problem that people face in their daily lives. If they face that in their daily lives in terms of getting a consolidating loan, why is it so difficult to transition that? Multiply it, put a big magnifier, multiply it by the billions, and the government's in the same position. And if you know that you reach a certain point in your family life where your borrowing is putting you in such a position, you have so much different loans all over the place, and you can't get them consolidated, you know one thing you have to do is you have to make some sacrifices to pay them. You're going to have to make some sacrifices to bring that debt down. Because you can't get a consolidating loan, you have nothing else to put in it, and the next crisis come, you're going to have to suck it up. You're going to have to swallow it. You're going to have to do something else because you can't borrow any more money to pay to manage the next crisis. That is the same way it can affect a family. The same way it can affect mommy and daddy is the same way it affects the country. There's no difference. The only difference is we've been able to get away with borrowing and not really showing the income to pay it by this idea of sovereign debt. And that at the end of the day, the government will find some way to satisfy its obligations, which is not something, not a liberty given to the average individual. And today's date, post-2009, you try even get a consolidation loan, they got to take your right arm and your left leg in security before they lend you that money. Come for consolidating loan and bring everything you have for it to be encumbered, chained down, and used as, and if you don't have it, you don't get it. And that is the position the country is in. And for that reason, having regard to where we are, some tax increases were agreed by the government as being vitally necessary to restoring fiscal balance and credit worthiness to the Bahamas government. Not so that we could borrow money to spend, not so that we could have money to splurge. I've told you, our ministry is vitally important as the Ministry of Legal Affairs and Office of the Attorney General has been cut to the nub. Our spending has been cut relentlessly, and it is the same throughout the government and public service. Spending in every ministry has been cut to an irreducible minimum. But the fact of the matter is, we have to restore financial balance, because notwithstanding great restraint this year, there has to be further borrowings just to pay loans already entered into that are mature this year, and the cost of those loans already entered into. And that's $1 billion of borrowing this year alone. There has to be a restoration of balance to the cash flow of the government and balance in this issue of borrowing. So, for example, a host of any number of the fees. We moved amendments today to the Harbor Dues Act. These will increase some fees. We've moved amendments to the Police Act and a number of other acts that will increase some administrative fees. You may say these are small increases. Yes, they're small increases, but they'll be spread over hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of boats, all the cruise ships, all these things. And when factored in on a monthly basis, they'll basically add to the cash flow so that the government will have more ready cash on hand to be able to satisfy a number of the debts, perhaps from its cash flow, instead of having to resort to maxing out the credit card. Because what happens is that when the government has, let's say, $30 million, a bill comes in, government looks, says, well, hold a second now. Day after tomorrow, we got to pay the salary bill. So we can't touch this bill. You follow me? Because if we touch this bill, and then some bills you have to pay when they fall due. So you may have to do that. What do you do about the salary bill? You go to the credit card, which is the facility arranged with the banking institution through which all government payments are routed, if not actually paid. They are routed from that institution to other institutions to people's accounts. Okay? You go to the credit card and borrow up to this 400 million or 40 million or whatever the limit is now. These host of minor fees, the intention is to help the government with its day-to-day cash flow so that the government is not called upon as frequently to maximize its pull on its credit card just to meet the salary and pensions needs of public service workers right now on a monthly basis as those debts fall due. You know, I want to remind Bahamians of something. I want to remind Bahamians of a situation that arose immediately before the last general elections and that persisted 2 months into our administration. For like 3 months before the last election, the former government was unable to pay the deductions that public servants had made for their mortgage payments on their pay slips for 2 months before the election and 1 month after the election. And even though everything was the 4th month, because persons started to complain that their mortgages weren't being paid. The government was unable for about 3 months and a bit to pay the deductions habitually, that certainly were authorized by each worker. This is my mortgage payment, $700. None of those were paid for 2 months before the election and a month or so afterwards. That's a real cash flow crisis, when the government could not meet its standard obligations to its own workforce. And that happened. That happened 2 months before the election, last election, and a month after. As we caught on, we realized the problem. People were coming in saying, banks said for the last 3 months, my home mortgage hasn't been paid. And then they realized that something was wrong, looked into it, had to find the money to compensate all these banks and persons for the 2 months before and the month that was in question, and then find the money to avoid a repetition. And to my knowledge, I've not heard of it having been repeated since. But I'm just saying, that is the kind of silent crisis caused by lack of cash flow that afflicted the last government in their dying days politically. We don't want to go back there. We don't want to go back to the kind of profligate spending for which the former government is now notoriously known and condemned for. That's why they lost the election. Listen, I ain't asking where the VAT money gone and all of them questions. They're retorting, no. Everything that we have seen since coming to office confirms the worst fears and suspicions of Bahamian people of chronic wastage by the former government. But leave that aside, we'll move on. The point is that one of the things that we are intent on doing, and we are about to do, is to table, and eventually we'll pass, a fiscal responsibility bill. It will bring a new day, because it will go hand in hand with a public procurement bill, which public procurement bill will also govern and legislate the award of all contracts by government agencies and government departments. It will make it transparent, it will make it more fair, and it will make it accountable, more accountable, the whole process. And so not only, yes, we are going through a bitter pill. Yes, we are going through a time of trial. Yes, we are all being mandated to go through sacrifice, joint sacrifice, mutual sacrifice, national sacrifice. But at the end of the day, this government is intent not only of going through this period, as we must, before it is inflicted on us by forces beyond our control, going through this period and also putting in a legislative framework that will prevent the kinds of abuse for which the former government was notorious and other governments may well have engaged in. And one must be fair. Not as profligate as y'all last 5 years. Not as profligate. Oh, no. Y'all wrote the book. Y'all wrote the book, signed, sealed, delivered it, and slammed it down the backs on the Bahamian people. That's what y'all did. Yeah, and the 5,000 people y'all hired on election day. You put in education on election day. So, jobs for the people. No, so Madam President, I acknowledge, and I think that we all on the government side acknowledge that the revenue measures in this tax and this budget bill, the tax measures, the revenue measures, are uncomfortable, they are painful. We acknowledge there is some loss of political capital, but that's why you have political capital. That's why I say, parliamentary democracy is more effective than that other system across the way. I remember President George Bush saying, I have the political capital and I intend to use it. And nothing get done. He was going to reform this and reform that. He said he had the political capital after his second re-election. President George Bush, and it wasn't, I remember President Obama saying, I have the political capital and I'm going to use it. And nothing happened because the system frustrated both of them. We have some political capital. We've lost it. We've lost that political capital. We've sacrificed some to the best interests of the Bahamian people. Because at the end of the day, if we live up to our commitment and you, the Bahamian people, live up to yours, all of us our children and our children's children will have a better future because of what we do today. Madam President, I commend to you and to my colleague senators this 2018-2019 budget, and I now ask for a seconder to the motion that I move. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Dwight Sawyer.
Talking about reporting.
Good morning, or good day, Madam President. Good day, fellow senators. Again, it is my pleasure to speak in this honorable place on this 2018-2019 budget, which is the people's budget. And this is the first real people's budget that's being presented to this country at this particular time. You want me to repeat it again? It's the people's budget, all right? But Madam President, just allow me a few brief moments to bring condolences to the family of the late Ezra Hebron. For some of you who don't know, Ezra Hebron was a very popular local musician. Of many of us who were in the late 50s, all during the 60s and early 70s, we used to enjoy hearing his fabulous music, melodious voice, and him playing the guitar. All of us at that time used to frequent a place called the Banana Boat, which was located on the corner in Oaksfield area, just opposite where the Caterpillar company is now presently located. In those days, we enjoyed going there. Times are different than they are now. We could have drove in our cars or on our bicycles, and sometimes many of us used to walk there at night and never have to worry about being molested or harmed or anything of that nature. You can't do that nowadays. But Ezra was one of those individuals who we enjoy going to his melodious music. And many of us, especially the younger art, used to like to hear him. He used to play Ully Gully too, but most of those love songs. And when he used to play those love songs and the music, when you have the one step and you do dance to the one tile or the two tile dance, so you just stay together like that and don't and the two tile dance. So all of us enjoyed Ezra music. He will be sorely missed. And on behalf of the Banana Boat crew, and after the Banana Boat had closed down in the 70s, we got together maybe 10 years after that. And we used to get together what we call the Banana Boat Reunion. And we met every year, once a year, just during the Christmas holiday, whereby we have a reunion. We called it Banana Boat Reunion. And since then, I think the group has now called themselves the Vintage Club, and we meet once a year. And Ezra was a local favorite at all of those Banana Boat reunions. And he will be sorely missed. And may his soul rest in peace. Huh? Ully Gully if you can read it, okay. So, Madam President, once again, I'd like to, on behalf of one of the few members of the Banana Boat reunion crew who's here now, I'd like to offer my deepest condolences to the family of the late Ezra Hebron. He was a member of the group at that time called Ezra and the Polka Dots. He will be sorely missed. May his soul rest in peace. Madam President, this last weekend we had a number of killings, and it breaks my heart to see this. And like I said the last time I spoke in this honorable place, I said that this crime is trending down. And I remain confident that based on the programs that the Minister of National Security and the police are now putting in place, we will see more improvement in the fight against crime. And I urge all Bahamians to assist the police in this effort so that we can feel once again safe and secure in our surroundings. Madam President, I now turn my attention to this year's 2018-2019 budget, the people's budget. I have to agree with our Deputy Prime Minister, the Honorable K. Peter Turnquist, when he says that this is a landmark budget that will transform our Bahamas. A budget that is responsible, a budget that is transparent, and a budget to all that we will be accountable for. We now have a budget that puts the past practices of artificially under-budgeted items behind us. A budget that will clear up the many arrears and under-budgeted commitments left behind by past governments. A budget that provides for responsible fiscal management and effective parliamentary and public scrutiny in the government's performance. And a budget that is sound and credible. When the Free National Movement won the election last year, it was on the understanding that we in the Free National Movement will fix the country, will fix the finances of the Bahamas, and this budget is a step in the right direction. And I find it amazing many times our members of the former government could go around talking about how good a state that they left the office in. But the Bahamian people realize this, and that's one of the reasons why the count was 35-4. And even though they lied about that, they'll continue to lie about other things. So, Madam President, as I said before, our people are really politically astute, and they understand our politics. And they understand the politics in the U.S., they understand the politics throughout the Caribbean islands. And in that regard, that's why when you listen to many talk shows now, all right, you think that most of the Bahamians who call on the talk shows now, sometimes I think that they have the answers to all these problems. Sometimes I think they went to the London School of Economics or to Harvard Business College. Because if you want to find the solutions to many of our problems, just listen to the many of the talk shows. But that is not the case. But it's good to know that the Bahamians are engaged in this type of democracy and they have freedom to express themselves on the radio stations that we gave them in 1992. Madam President, when I read this budget, I'm happy to find that as a country, we are finally being fiscally responsible. And we all know that the government ministries were asked to, last year I think it was, to take a 10% cut in their budgets. And this put pressure for us to be fiscally prudent, and that I welcome a great deal. With reference to the budget, as I said earlier, I welcome the Digital Bahamas Initiative, where we will be reducing the cost of doing business with the government. It is good to see we will be simplifying and digitizing government procedures. We are now moving in the right direction. When I read this budget, I see that this budget provides hope and opportunity for new home owners, entrepreneurs, young people, many of the OAL communities and communities in the inner city, and hope and opportunity for the future of the Bahamas. Madam President, in the last election, general election, we in the Free National Movement made certain promises. And when I see this budget, I look at it and it provides, and at what it provides, and I say the promises are being kept. Number one, there's no VAT on bread basket items. And I repeat, there's no VAT on bread basket items. 2-3 years ago, when the VAT was introduced, when the VAT was introduced, all items were taxed 7.5%. And the bread basket, and they put 7.5% on the poor people, on the low-income people, and all of those, okay? And like I said, there's no care for the poor.
No care for the poor.
And when you look at the bread basket items,
Put VAT on everything.
and when you look at the bread basket, which consists of some items like bread, milk, cream, etc., now we don't have to worry about that. Come July the 1st, there'll be no VAT you have to pay on that.
Shame on you.
And there's like 15 or 16 of those items. And as we move forward, I understand that the Minister of Health, he says that in this coming year, early next year, that the bread basket items will be adjusted and reviewed, so that more items will be included into that mix, to include things like fruits and vegetables, so that we can have a healthier lifestyle. Huh? But we cannot do that until after consultation with the Bahamian people and also after consultation with the Bahamian public and also the Bahamian businesses. All right. So, so as of July the 1st, no VAT on bread basket, and that's a great deal. Madam President, also, number 2, there'll be no VAT on your light bill if it's under $200. All right? And there's many people like that, Madam President. This helps not only the man over there, but all of us. And many people say that, and I heard a man say the other day that his light bill is under $200. And my question is, what do you do to lower your light bill? Madam President, I was also pleased to hear that the Member of Parliament for Pine Yard said that his light bill was under $200 a month. And I know where he lives. Madam President, I also like to join with the member for Pine Yard to say that my light bill is under $200.
Oh, very good.
And Madam President, please, Madam President, I brought my light bills to show you that where I live, my light bill.
You'll be exempted from that.
No. My light bill, and you see here, for May and June, I show you my light bill, and this particular one, 181, the next one was 91, my light bill. Hold on, like I tell you. No, please.
$192.
It's there. And it's been like that for several months, I can tell you. All right? I live, look here, I don't live in the beach. I live in the Boyd subdivision area. All right? And I don't think, well, I guess you could call that a Old Hill community also, right? But my house is on a little ridge. I get a nice breeze. But more importantly, listen to me. But more importantly, Madam President, one of the major components of your light bill is your water heater. I had my water heater now for about 25 years. When I got that, I adjusted it. The thermostat on that was set around 160. I cut it down to 125. Just recently last week. And this is the lesson I want to a lot of us Bahamians. My water heater got short. When I went in the bathroom to take a shower, no hot water was coming out. So I figured that was my element was gone. But my son said, no, Daddy, I think something went wrong with the electricity in the room. So he called the electrician to come look at it. So I came home early last week, Monday morning, when the electrician was there. He looked at the water, he said, oh, the first thing, he said, your water heater busted. I said, what you mean my water heater busted? I said, the only thing wrong with that is element. Because he wanted me to go out and buy a new element. I said, no, man. I know these things. The only thing going with in that my water heater is element. Within 5 minutes, I told him to change it. Within 5 minutes, he changed that water element. It cost me $15 for a water element. And my water heater was back on again. And then if I had listened to him, and he says that's what a lot of plumbers do, because they don't want to change the water element, the element in your water. They say it's no good, so you throw it out. But every 2 or 3 years, or 4 or 5 years, Madam President, right? I take the time to disconnect my water heater and I clean it out so that it could last a little longer. And that's one of the reasons why my bill is like that. Now, admittedly, Mr. Leader of the opposition over there, now my light bill will start going up now because I'm turning my air conditioner on. For the next couple of months, it'll be over that, right? Okay? So I just want to be honest with everybody here. But generally speaking, I'm very conscious, and there's 3 people live in my house.
60,000 people being affected by this.
Yes.
All right. So now I realize that there's a lot of people who are being affected by this, and so therefore, when I say, when the government says they remove the VAT on bills under $200, it's important that we know that, and the 60,000 households be affected by that. Okay. Now my water bill is a little more than $50, okay, a month, but nevertheless I don't use that much water. All right, but it's possible to do it. No, you just got to keep watching I take a shower every day, just like everybody else. I have a washer, just like everybody else. Okay. Okay, I use washer, I have a washer, I have a dryer, and everything else. I have a fridge, I have a freezer, just like everybody else. But I was taught a long time ago how to be prudent as I was growing up and not to waste things.
You sound like you from High Bradley.
I'm from Broward.
Yeah, you from Bradley.
I'm from
Bradley,
Broward.
man.
Okay. So, Madam President, so I'd like to congratulate our government on reducing the VAT on those items like electricity bill and water bills. And I just want some of the individuals, the people in the Bahamas to know that they could, if they take it upon themselves, they too could reduce some of their costs by doing some simple things around the house. And of course, you got to watch the light bulbs and switch the LEDs. And it's also, they should also watch the water that's being sometimes wasted in your toilet because sometimes the lever doesn't work and the water keeps running and running and running, and you see the water bill goes up. I also like number 3, to congratulate the government on they reduce the custom duty on clothes and shoes items, and this would benefit many people in the Bahamas. This would benefit many people as they shop for clothes and shoes and all these shops over there. And I trust that the merchants who buy these items from the States and elsewhere will make sure that these cost reductions are carried on to the consumer. And Mr. Minister who's in charge of Consumer Affairs, I charge you to make sure that the cost savings will be carried on and passed on to the consumer.
It will be done.
Another item, Madam Speaker, is that the payments, like you say, like the commercial say, I don't go to Miami to shop, I go to Florida to shop. And the fact that the government increased the exemption from $200 to $500 is a good thing. And I know that come Christmas time and in summertime, many families will be going to the U.S. twice a year. And the only thing I urge them to please be honest when they declaring their items that they bring in duty free to the customs. Now, before many payments will bring in $1,000 worth of goods and say, well, I even got $200 or $300 goods. Now it's $500. I guess they'll bring in about $2,000. But I urge payments to be honest, because the government needs the money that they collect from customs duty so that they can continue to pay public servants and do the things that they want to do in this country. Madam President, as I move around town a lot, and many times I hear people say that the FNM promised to give full scholarships to Bahamians to the University of Bahamas. Well, beginning in September of 2019, that's next year, right? This will happen to all the Family Island students, and the Family Island students will receive a stipend, of $500 towards the living accommodations. What is new? They get the people in the Family Islands, when they come, they'll get a $500 housing stipend, right? Students who live in the college at Bahamas. Yeah. Please don't interfere. Okay. All right. That too is new. I was also excited when I listened to the Prime Minister give his contribution on Monday at the House Assembly, where he introduced the 4 top students from the University of the Bahamas School of Economics, and that he will give them a job within the Ministry of Finance for 1 year. And then that these same students will be sponsored by government to a top university in the U.S., I guess also in Canada and probably England also, or elsewhere, to get a master's degree. Madam President, this is great news. But what is also wonderful about this is that this is not only a 1-year deal, it's a 10-year deal. And on top of that, he says that these students will be paid top dollars. I guess they'll be making more than $50,000 or $60,000 a year. And so this will be a way of stopping the brain drain now of many of our young students who now go abroad to seek employment elsewhere. The government is also making life better for the low-income people and poor people, and also with the young people by providing incentives for them. No, we ain't fired no one. We don't fire people. They fire themselves. The government housing program will allow young people the opportunity to get their homes. Not only just the young people, but also the custom officers, the police officers, the prison officers, the nurses, and the teachers. And this is not only helping the poor man, but everybody else. Now, Madam President, I now move to, I may want to make a comment with the web shops owners in this town. The tax, and it's contrary to what the opposition wants to make other people believe, that we're taxing the web shops or the business. No, we are not. And according to the Ministry responsible for gaming, the average tax for the web shops will be like 28% of their earnings or revenue. Now, with reference to the web shops, I have a public disclosure I want to make. I also buy numbers. I've been buying numbers for many times, and now it's illegal. Of course, a lot of people have been buying numbers. It's legal, all right?
Right, I never knew you.
Huh?
I never knew you.
I don't know the rubbish. Because, but I only spend, I only spend what I could afford, all right, unlike other people. Because, you know, when you go to the web shops to buy numbers, really, the web shops are really taxing you in their own way. Because they tax and payment people on they quote unquote taxing on a daily basis because it's entertainment. Yeah, but look here. But what are they selling? They're selling us a dream, a hope. No hope. They're looking for a pot. They're looking for a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow, and very few people get that pot of gold. And many times when I go into web shops, I see them just spending all this other stuff going on. They spend all right, but at the end of the day, the web shop owners, they're making a ton of money, plenty of money. Do you agree? Huh? Plenty of money. So it's important. It is important that it's important with the syntax that it's important that the government realizes much more money from the revenue of the web shops. Right. Madam President, as I rise, yes. My final comment, Madam President, is that, of course, my final comment, Madam President. Having listened to leader a while ago, even giving a clarification on the reasons why we have to borrow this money and the reasons why we need this 12% increase in VAT. Okay? I wouldn't go into details, and he explained to us all about the interest and why we had to pay over all these years, okay? And it was ably explained to us. And I commend you, Mr. Attorney General, for that clarification, and I hope that many people will listen to you, and I hope that you, once again, that you make it known again about the clarification on the debt and how it came about and all the interest payment, okay? Now, Mr. Minister, I do hope that, and one thing, like I said, you know, the way you explain things is very good. I know, as I said before, I know that at the end of your political career, I'm quite certain you'll find a nice job at a COB where you go there as a professor. Professor Bethel. Oh no, as a retired. No, chief. Chief. Listen to me. Leave me alone, okay? Okay, but Mr. Attorney General, Mr. Attorney General, I'd like to congratulate you and commend you on the leave explanation of that. And Madam President, as I close, I'd like to close by saying that I second this. I second the bill on the budget for 2018-2019, and I support it. And let there be no doubt about it. With God's willing, unless there's anything barring any of unforeseen circumstances with me, I will be voting yes, a big yes, on all items of it. So I commend this bill and I support this bill. Thank you, Madam President.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act for the appropriation of diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on revenue account for the financial year commencing 1st of July 2018 and ending the 30th of June 2019. As many. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Mike Darville.
Madam President.
Chair now recognizes Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel.
Thank you, Madam President. with the consent of all colleagues, there's an agreement, I rise to move that the business of the Senate be suspended until tomorrow morning, the 21st of June, 2018 at 10 a.m. If I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate be suspended to Thursday, June 21st, 2018 at 10 a.m. All those in favor would say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The business of the Senate is suspended to Thursday, June 21st, 2018 at 10 a.m.